Okay, so we are coming down to time. This next category is going to be special education. It'll be one question, and then we're going to follow that by community questions, if there are any that folks would like to ask, and then followed by your closing statement. Each of the responses are going to be 1 minute. Besides the closing statement, we're asking that you keep that down to 30 seconds. This next category, one question, is a focus on special education. Here is the question. Full funding advocacy. The federal government has never met its promise to fund 40% of the cost of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. As SPI, what specific coalition building strategies will you use to demand that the federal government pay its fair share and relieves the burden on California taxpayers? 1 minute each. The first one up is going to be Al.
All right. Well, the IDEA is a federal law that is going to require Congress to act to fully fund the IDEA. And so I would work with California's congressional delegation to keep fighting. I know we've been fighting for decades, but we need to keep fighting for the federal government to pay, their fair share of special education costs. But beyond that, I'm not going to wait for the federal government because we've been waiting for decades. I have a bill that's in the legislature now that's trying to increase funding for special education students because we know that even though we're seeing declining enrollment throughout the state, that we're seeing increasing numbers of special education students that are putting, you know, a big challenge for our local school budgets. And so I'm going to be fighting both at the federal level as well as at the state level to increase funding for special education.
Thank you. Next is Anthony.
Well, Al is right. We can't wait for the federal government. We didn't. We didn't wait for the federal government on so many different aspects of governance. In this state, we did not wait for the federal government to do anything on gun control because we knew they wouldn't. So we passed the five toughest gun control bills in the history of the United States. We couldn't wait for the federal government to do something about tobacco abuse. So we passed the five toughest anti-tobacco bills in the United States. We need to do that with IDEA funding. The best way to make sure we have our own funding in this state is, again, to re-examine Proposition 13. Our schools, our municipalities have been cash starved since the passage of Proposition 13. It's something that, with a little flirtation we had with the split roll, we haven't really looked at it, but it's something we need to do. And we need to California needs to take care of California. We should not be waiting any longer for the federal government. They've proven to be inept.
Thank you. Frank, you're next.
Thank you so much for the question. I agree that we shouldn't wait for the federal government. I mean, they've dismantled the California Department of Education, which is largely where, these services should have been coming from. So prioritize California to fully fund special education. Part of my program does call for sped justice. And I think that the main thing we need to really highlight is the instability in special education from the professionals. The 50% turnover is much, much higher actually in special education. And unlike any other profession, where in a doctor in the medical field, you would have a surgeon dealing with the highest, most complicated cases that takes years of training. And what's happening out of desperation across districts is that we're putting in the newest people, the youngest people, and expecting them to offer actual professional services for some of the highest needs. I think we need to invest in college track to make sure that free education is available for those who are going to special education. They receive the training and mentorship necessary to provide the stability of the services.
Thank you, Frank. Gus, you're next.
Thank you for the question. So Congress responds to only two things. One is money and the other is public pressure. Money comes from special interests, so it's got to be public pressure. There are so many amazing organizations that do work in this space, community-based organizations. My own campaign manager is actually a special education advocate. I was just in San Luis Obispo about a week ago, and they were having a walk for autism, and there were a whole bunch of community organizations who were there who work in the space of special needs. And I think what we got to do is put together a very loud, very visible public pressure campaign on Congress, utilizing the stories and the efforts of all the community partners that are out there who work in this space, who do really amazing hard work in that space. And that, by the way, organizing that kind of aggressive public pressure campaign on Congress is exactly the kind of thing that the superintendent can use the visibility of the role to do, and will be able to do regardless of whether the governor's proposal passes or not. So that's something I very much look forward to engaging on as superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you. Josh?
Well, let me agree, kind of vigorously with Frank. One of the best and smartest thing we can do is address the educated workforce problem around special ed, and that's going to take dedicated funds. But it's more than worth the investment if we're serious about raising the standard of special education in California. And so I would wholeheartedly support that. And I think the superintendent has to be a really aggressive advocate, especially within the budget frame, in finding the funds to do that. Otherwise, we're not going to see any progress, especially short of the federal investment, and really unlikely that we're going to see that during this administration. But it's also true that this really isn't a red or blue issue. And our delegation and others and other superintendents and secretaries of education across the country should provide for a coalition that elevates this issue because it is important, and the federal government has not met its obligation for 40 years. And everybody knows a family with a special needs child, and they deserve every bit of support.
Thank you. Nichelle, you're next.
The coalitions that I believe need to be built to demand fully funding of special education is, as a superintendent, is working with stakeholders, our special education workforce, our general education teachers, administrators, folks that are boots on the ground, that understand what the need is and how we can utilize current funding to begin to meet those needs, and how we can fight together as collective advocates for special education, and not treat education as just a line item in a budget where we're looking at what the specific needs are. There are a variety of disabilities, seen and unseen, variety of needs and supports that are required, and understanding what those look like so that we can allocate the specific funding for those, which leads to fully funding special education.
Thank you. And Richard, you're next.
So the percentage of students with IEPs in California has gone over the past decade from about 11-12% up to about 18% now. So it is an issue that impacts all schools and all students as much as any other issue. And we do have opportunities at our local and state level to increase investment in behavioral health support, to increase investment in paraeducators, reduce ratios for special education teachers. We just achieved that through a negotiated agreement with our teachers. And so there are examples that we can lift up. In terms of the federal government's responsibility, the federal government is now going to spend 4 times the amount it spends on special education on private school voucher giveaways. So one coalition we need to build is everybody who's running for Congress right now, especially in our swing districts, needs to be held accountable to how they're going to make sure that the federal government meets its obligations.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for those answers on special education, a really important topic.